so great to see you.
Yeah, likewise. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I
Good.
mean, it's a funny question at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think everyone has their highs and lows, but all things considered, I'm well. And
good,
now
good.
I met you last year when you were at Happy Place.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
slightly different format. It's now
yeah,
Happy Place Festival, the virtual year.
yeah.
But we're so happy to have you back. And
Thanks
it
so
feels
much.
like
Yeah,
more than ever, you and your expertise um, can help us and support us in what is an incredibly stressful time for many of us. Now, you
yeah,
are a psychotherapist,
yeah,
now an author of 2 books,
yeah.
yes, and a
Who would have
mental
thought?
health professional.
Yeah,
It really is timely because I feel like we need ideas on managing stress and anxiety at the moment more than ever. You must have people coming forward and saying, "Hey mate, I'm finding all of this slightly overwhelming. What should I be doing?"
it's been an interesting time. I mean, my book, the new book, is called 10 Times Happier, and essentially, my first book, 10 to Zen, was a.
Congratulations, by the way. When I last saw you, you were working hard at book number 2.
That's right. I just kind of started to think about ideas and
So
what I
now it's
would
been
do.
born.
Yeah, and now it's born. And yeah, I wanted to write a book on happiness. And, essentially the idea was, I wanted to talk about where I see people get stuck with their own happiness. And I thought about all of the patients, all the clients I'd worked with over the years, and I thought, where do most people get stuck in relation to their own happiness? So I come up with the 10 themes where I see people get stuck over and over and over again. And that really formed the content really for 10 Times Happier. So interestingly then, of course, the book was finished at the earlier part of the year, and I was really pleased to be releasing it. And of course, the pandemic came. And then I thought, oh my God, do I release a book on happiness in the middle of a pandemic, or shall I hold fire? And then it was really, I had a really interesting thing happened actually. I was talking to my dad about it, and my dad is just a very, working class. He was a builder all his life. And I was saying to him, oh God, I'm really struggling. I don't know whether I should release a book and should I hold fire? And he said to me, well, why did you write the book? And I said, well, I wanted to help people. And he said, well, why the hell would you delay releasing a book at the moment? And to be fair, it was probably the most solid piece of advice that I got, really.
Well done, Father O'Kane.
Yeah, exactly. So the book came out, and the reason I did let it come out, I talk about worry, I talk about uncertainty, I talk about conflict, relationships. They're all the things really I think that we're struggling with at the moment. And if I'm being honest, had I have known a pandemic was coming and we were going to be in difficult times, most of the content that's in there, I probably would have included in a coping with a pandemic or a life transition book anyway. So inadvertently, I think it's the right time, and I'm really hopeful that it can help people.
I'd like to know a little bit more about 10 Times Happier, but if we can go all the way back to actually your background,
Yeah, of course.
for people who maybe aren't aware of the work you've done to get to the point of now being an author, could you tell us a little bit about Owen O'Kane?
Yeah. I mean, background-wise, I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. So, I grew up in Belfast, and that was a really tough upbringing for a number of reasons. The Troubles were difficult, and it was quite an anxious place to grow up. And I didn't realise that I was anxious until I left. So I left Belfast when I was in my 20s, and it was only when I left that I realised that, my God, that was quite a scary place to grow up. And I realised that I'd learned how to worry, but I didn't realise it. It's interesting. It's like anything in life. Sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you don't realise the impact. It's only when you leave.
You need that hindsight.
Yeah, exactly. But, I had a great, I loved growing up there. There were some great people. I love being Irish. I'm very proud of my heritage and my roots. But there was another kind of complexity in the equation. So, I later, in my early 20s, discovered I was gay. So the whole being Irish, Catholic and gay thing was quite an interesting mix. And
Had its complexities.
has its complexity. So I'm pretty good on guilt and shame. I know a lot about it. I could probably do a PhD on guilt and shame.
I know, I'm Catholic, Owen. Don't we love to feel guilty?
I know. It's just, yeah.
Love a bit of guilt.
I'm a bit of an expert on it, but well, actually, I'm much better than I used to be back in the day. But anyway, long story short, I suppose my background was interesting, and my career then was split into the first part of my career was in health, and I worked mostly as a palliative care specialist. So I was working with people who were terminally ill and dying. And I did that for a long period of time, loved the work and really believed in it wholeheartedly. But the
Such a
one,
challenging job.
it was
I
really
can't
challenging.
imagine what
Honestly, it
that's
was
like.
way more life affirmative than you can imagine. I mean, honestly, it was not a miserable job or a difficult job.
Mm.
I loved the work, but I think for most people it has a shelf life, and I did it for a number of years. I think I did it for about 10 years, and I thought I need to do something different. And as
Do
I
you
was,
feel like you not give part of yourself to every patient, but it must be rewarding, but very demanding?
it is in some ways, but actually it's quite humbling as well. I mean, my idea of a bad day was always put into context. If I was moaning about work, or if I was moaning about getting a new mortgage, or the ordinary, or my car's broken down, or all of
Mm.
this stuff that we moan about, I would often come away thinking, actually, I really don't have much to complain about in my life. So it was actually really humbling, and I think it keeps your feet in the ground. I think anyone who works in that arena will always talk about being quite humbled and aware of what's important, and aware of time, and making the best of time, and making the best of life, really. And I suppose really that informs a lot of my work about how do we make the best of our life? How do we live as full a life as possible? And even in palliative care, we talk a lot about hope and the importance of hope. So palliative care often isn't about dying, it's about living while dying. If that
Mm.
makes sense, which is essentially what we're all doing anyway. But I
Hmm.
suppose people with a terminal diagnosis have been given a warning shot, and they know it's coming much sooner than they perhaps expected. So it's a different way of working. But interestingly, in that work, I realized that the one thing that I wasn't very good, well, it's not that I wasn't very good at, but the one area that I didn't feel skilled at was the psychology and managing human distress. And yeah, I could do all the medical stuff and I could talk to people, but when it came to the really complicated stuff and people were really tied up in knots, I didn't feel I had the skills. So I went off then and did a master's in psychotherapy and retrained. And that then started the next, my career's been in half really, health and
Hmm.
psychology. And I did a master's in psychotherapy and then became fascinated about how we operate, how we think as human beings, what makes us worry, what makes us happy. So my career then moved in a different direction. I decided that my time in palliative care was done. And I then moved into mental health type work, qualified as a psychotherapist, trained in lots of different models of psychotherapy, worked in the NHS for a long time, and then got to clinical lead level. And again, hard work, challenging, but I enjoyed it. And then I thought, why don't I do something new and different? And then bizarrely, the opportunity to write a book came up, almost by accident, but it happened. And I was delivering a workshop and someone said, oh, you really need to write a book on what you do and your experience of life and what you think can help people. And that led to the first book. And then thankfully the first book did well. And then I got the offer to do a second book. And that kind of brings me to now, really.
Oh, and I have to ask, out of interest, I always struggle saying it,
Palliative care, yeah.
palliative care nurse, um, what did you most often hear from people who were, as you put it so eloquently, living out their final days, weeks, months? Like you said, I bet they weren't complaining about their cars or,
Yeah.
the small things that bug us. What
It
do you
was,
hear from people in those final stages?
I mean, by and large, there were themes that come up over and over and over again. And the main theme really was around regret, how
Mm.
they would have spent their time differently, what that would have looked like. And it was always about spending time with family, more adventure, more holidays, not taking life so seriously, spending less time in work, not worrying about the stuff that ultimately doesn't matter. I mean, you would hear that over and over and over again. And interestingly, in the book, I was thinking about this the other day. When I was writing the book, I had a particular, by the end of the book, by about chapter 9, chapter 10, I had, people talk about writer's block, which I thought was a made up concept, by the way. I thought writers just said that to sound a bit
Bit
cool.
writerish.
That writerish, or a bit kind of, oh, that sounds a bit arty, doesn't it? Oh, I've got writer's block. But I genuinely did. Towards the end, I thought, oh God, I feel stuck. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted, you know, and I'm never really short of words, but I genuinely got to the end and I thought, I'm not quite sure where I want to go next.
Especially at number 9 out of 10.
I
That's
know, and
pressure.
I got stuck, and I went for a walk one day. And this is going to sound really, really odd, but I went for a walk, and there's a park near where I live, and there's a graveyard attached to the park. And I went for a walk around the graveyard, and I don't even know why I was there, but I was just kind of wandering around. It was quiet, there was nobody around, and I noticed in all of these tombstones and stuff, and I started to read them as you do out of curiosity. And it really struck me that none of the tombstones talked about people's achievements. It didn't talk about, oh my God, they made a fortune, they had this in their career, they had this qualification. Every single tombstone talked about them being a
Mm.
friend, a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, the legacy they left in life. And I thought, God, it's incredible actually, isn't it? You walk around here and suddenly you realize what's important and what matters. And it really reflects really what happened in the palliative care world. People used to share their wisdom, you know, every day with you, you know, and particularly when I worked night duty and stuff, you'd be sitting with someone at 2 o'clock in the morning having a cup of tea, you know, you'd be having a cup of tea with them and they would just be talking about life often in the most profound way.
I bet you were fantastic at that job. I really do. I can
I
imagine the
loved it.
families saying, it's okay, we've got this wonderful
Yeah.
carer who's
You know
making
something that
everything better.
I loved the work. I really enjoyed the work and I believed in the work. You know how sometimes when we do stuff in life, you've got to really believe in what you're doing, don't you? I think you've got to do what you think's important and what puts fire in your belly. And I suppose ultimately for me, it was never, I didn't see myself as brilliant in the job, but I believed in the job and I
Hmm.
believed in the importance of being with somebody and helping them understand why they might be struggling, not just the person who was dying, but their family as well, and how they may adjust and cope and make sense of it. So to be honest, rather than me say I was great at the job, to be honest, it was a bit of a privilege
Yeah.
to be in someone's life at that point. So, you know, I'm kind of eternally grateful. I think it set
Hmm.
me up in my life and enables me to do what I do, to be fair.
Oh, and it's a big question. But do
Try
you
me.
believe happiness is something that we can all achieve?
Absolutely. And I think, and this is kind of partly what I mean, the fact that we even ask it as a question is
Mm.
really, really interesting because I think we see happiness as an out there concept or something that's not terribly realistic or, you know, a fluffy concept. And I think happiness, it depends how you define happiness, really. I mean, our definitions won't be the same at all. I mean, what's happy for you isn't going to be happy for me. But ultimately, I think we all know what happiness is, and it's generally about being comfortable and at ease with yourself and your world. It's probably the broadest definition I can give. But I think when you get to that point, when you're comfortable in your own skin,
Hmm.
at ease with yourself and at ease with the world generally, then I think it doesn't matter about what you've got going on externally. I think then you can be happier. And for me, the travesty is I think a lot of people get in the way of their own happiness and they don't realize they're doing it.
Mm.
And that really is a premise of writing a book on happiness because I think it's natural. It's in our DNA. It's kind of almost in our, for most of us in our upbringing, really, that we think that happiness is always going to be about something external. When I get more money, when I get the job, when I'm more successful, when I'm more famous, whatever the context might be. And what I know from most people, if I'm working with an A-list celebrity or I'm working with somebody who works in the factory, it doesn't matter because if they're struggling with the internal world, none of it matters because, you
Mm.
know, for example, if they're crippled with worry or they're crippled with self-doubt or a critical voice, they
And it
become,
doesn't matter if they have a house in the Bahamas.
it doesn't matter. And so I suppose my job really and what I see my work as is helping people see, find out and notice where you're getting in the way of your own happiness and then you can do something about it.
What are the most common blocks for all of your clients
I
and
would
the people
say
that you've seen that block their own happiness?
I would say the majority, 99% of people I see in therapy, there are two key ingredients. I think the first thing, most people are really hard on themselves. They
Mm.
beat themselves up. They give themselves a hard time. I think for most people, I rarely meet somebody in therapy who rocks up thinking, "Oh, I'm pretty good to myself. I'm not critical. I'm kind to myself." And on that note, self-compassion. I think when you lack self-compassion and you don't be kind to yourself and you don't look after yourself, then you struggle. And I think for most people, even if they can make that adjustment, then things change drastically for them. Small
It's such
thing.
a basic thing, but it's something that I've spoken to other people throughout this Happy Place Festival. You know, that self-compassion, it's so simple, the idea to be kind to yourself, but it is something that I think most people struggle with.
Well, they do. I mean, most of us would never speak to another human being the way we talk to ourselves. I mean,
Absolutely not. I
we
wouldn't have any friends.
yeah, we just you just wouldn't say it, you know. And when I feed this back in therapy to people and say, look, would you say that to your best friend? And they'd say, oh my God, no, of course I wouldn't. And I'd say, well, why wouldn't you? And they'd say, well, they'd be annihilated and they'd feel awful. And I said, well, what, you know, you're doing that to yourself every day of the week. So why would you live that way and think that it's okay and it's comfortable? So I think for me that overarching theme is really, really important. But then, you know, people then get stuck in all of these other areas. They get locked in their past, believing that they're defined by it. They get fixated on the future, trying to control it. And of course, as we've learned lately, there isn't any control over lots of stuff. So how do you get comfortable with uncertainty? And how do you live in a world that actually, where there are no guarantees, that often we don't know what's coming next, but how can you be okay with that? And how can you get comfortable with the not knowing? And I think when people learn that, again, they become happier.
You must, of course, practice what you preach. What exercises do you find the most effective that myself and our Happy Place audience can apply during this, you know, hugely stressful time?
There are a number of things. I mean, look, let's be completely honest. Do I always practice what I preach? Like every other human being on the planet, I get it wrong and I screw up sometimes, you know, and I can get overwhelmed or I can get pulled into stuff that I don't want to get pulled into.
You faff?
Yeah, well,
Bit of a faff?
better
A
than
little bit of a procrastinate?
better than I used to be honest. I used to get wound up by the wrong stuff. And I think there's something about getting older that teaches you to realize that actually I can let that go. You know, it really isn't worth the effort. And I worry less. This is quite a great freedom, actually. I really worry less about what other people think. And
how liberating.
That is really liberating, more liberating. I mean, you hear it, don't you, you hear it in everyday practice and you read it in books and stuff. But the older I get, I've got much better at thinking, do you know something? I don't care. Not in a rude way or an obnoxious way, but actually if I spend my life trying to please people, then, you know, it's going to be a pretty miserable existence, to be quite honest. And I think you can't please everyone anyway. So, but in terms of tips, I think there are a couple of things. I think most people don't realize that the human brain, like every part of the body, can become tired and it can become worn down and it can become depleted. And I think we don't even hesitate to think about looking after the physical body if we're unwell. You know, it's a given, isn't it? We will just go to the doctor if we're feeling unwell. And I honestly believe that even if we take 10, 15 minutes out of our day to allow the mind time to quieten, to allow ourselves time to just kind of bring it down a few notches, then essentially the brain functions better. And I think I can't emphasize how important that is, because when the brain becomes cluttered, it's like driving in fog. It's hard to be clear. It's hard to know what direction you're moving. And I think often the stopping even for 10 minutes a day will help you declutter, and it helps you clear the fog in a way so that you can see clearer. And I can't emphasize how important that is.
And I was looking at your Instagram stories earlier, and it was actually very calming. You've gone to a beautiful park in Richmond, and it's the same scene in every Instagram story, and you're just talking through, you know, just
Stopping, yeah.
Breathe. Observe your breath. And I found myself holding my phone. Yeah. And it's those very small things.
Of course it
you
is.
forget to do, and then someone simply explains that will help. And it's so powerful and so simple.
Well, of course it is. I mean, it's really interesting when I'm working with people and I say, look, just stop for a moment and notice how you just even now, if we stopped and noticed the volume of activity in our mind or the sheer noise in our mind, people can be absolutely gobsmacked sometimes just by the sheer speed at which their mind's moving and the sheer
racket.
Yeah, absolutely. It's chaotic, isn't it? It's like being in a busy nightclub. And I think that the art of stopping and pulling back enables you to firstly, you can recognize the volume of noise, but actually you can make a decision not to engage with it. And I know it's the most simple premise in the world, but if you over engage with the content of your mind and you start to listen to it, and then you start to, almost dialogue back and forward with it, then it's like a snowball effect. You build it up and suddenly anxiety levels are through the roof, mood drops, and you become more distressed. And I think the art of stopping and pulling back and realizing that you have a decision on how much you engage or disengage with your mind, there's a real freedom in that. I mean, I remember the first time I found this out, it was incredible actually. A friend bought me the book The Power of Now. I don't know if you've read it.
Is that Eckhart
Tolle? Yeah.
Tolle.
Yeah.
And then Fearne is a huge...
Tolle. Yeah, I haven't read it before. And my friend bought it to me. He was a priest actually, and he was on his way back to South Africa, and I met him at Heathrow. And he said, I'll tell you a really odd thing that happened actually. He gave me a copy of the book and he said, I think you'll really like this. And that same week I was in Waterstones, and I don't kid you, I was in the bookshop and that book fell off the shelf. And I'd never heard of it, ever. I noticed the title and I thought, that's a clever title.
Life has a funny way of making things...
It's really weird.
Seen and heard, I often find as well.
I'm not terribly superstitious, but I was curious about the book and I read the book, and I remember at the end of it thinking, oh my God, I never realized you didn't have to engage with your mind. I didn't realize that you didn't have to.
How do you disengage, Owen?
You observe and you watch and you make a decision. It's a bit like, you know what, if you had somebody in your life.
I find that very difficult because I know that what you practice, you get good at. And if I'm always practicing, I love it. I'm going to make this my own therapy session. Thank you, Fearne. What you practice, you get good at. And if I practice and constantly engage with the negative cycle of thoughts, I'll get very good at it. And so you know that you shouldn't be doing it. But it's sometimes very difficult.
I know, but you've got to remember as well, and to be fair on you, that about 60 to 80% of human thoughts are negative in nature. The neuroscientists tell us that when they look at the brain, they know that we're kind of quite programmed to think negatively. People don't realize that, but I suppose our job is to realize that often the negative thoughts don't really serve any purpose whatsoever. And then when you break them down, if I'm working in therapy with somebody and they come along and they say to me, I just keep having this thought telling me that I'm rubbish. And I break it down with them and say, okay, well, where's the evidence? Tell me where is the evidence that supports that you're rubbish. They'll come up with one or two things, but then you break that down further with them and think, does that really make you rubbish? Would you think another human being was rubbish because of that? And of course,
if your friend was saying it to you,
yeah, you'd say, no, not at all. You're just human. And I think then when you break it down and you start to look at the thought patterns that are critical, and you can see them for what they are, which is noise, just like noise in the background. And
observe it and don't engage.
Just observe it and don't engage. It's a bit like an irritating friend. If you had a friend who was...
Observe them and don't engage.
But you would something. Sometimes we have people in life and they just might go on and on and on, and they just deliver a lot of stuff, or they may be incredibly negative. You learn that art of thinking, actually, I just got to switch off here because I'm going to be exhausted by the end of it. And I think it's like we can exhaust ourselves as well by some of the chatter that we get involved with. And I think the key really is to recognize that, firstly, that it's going on, and secondly, that you have real power in how you engage with it.
Gosh, it's very calming and reassuring.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, it's honestly...
know that actually we have a lot more power over our mental cycle than I think most of us know we do.
I think everything in life, I was talking to a journalist about this the other day. I mean, not one human being on the planet, particularly at the moment, has zero control over direction or what's going to happen next. Or when something like a pandemic happens, we're suddenly realize, my God, we have way less power than we think we do. And I think the real freedom in that is that you can't control that there, but actually what you can control is how you're going to respond. And I've seen it all through this pandemic, people getting hysterical about it, people getting angry about it, people getting frustrated about it, that it shouldn't be happening, measured against people thinking, okay, it has happened. I wish it weren't happening, but it has happened. And I'm going to navigate my way through this. What's it going to teach me? How am I going to, what am I going to learn from this here? What can
I take from it?
Yeah, what will I take from this? What will I do differently going forward? And I think that's life in a nutshell, really. We can't stop what's going to happen, but we can really control how we respond. And I suppose really that's what 10 Times Happier talks about. You have way more say in your life and your happiness than you realize. And the moment there's a chapter in the book called Addiction to Drama. And I loved writing the chapter, actually. It was quite an exciting chapter to write. And the reason I decided to write that chapter is I do believe that most people create their own drama. You know, we watch telly and we watch movies because we like drama. And I think even in our own internal worlds, we create drama sometimes without even realizing we're doing it, you know. Wrong relationships, unhealthy friendships, patterns that are not any good for us, making decisions that we know even at the time are not going to be healthy, but we go ahead and do it anyway. So we create over and over and over again, very often the same dramas, and then we get really irritated that it's happened and we blame it on other people or we blame it on life. And I think the power in coming back and thinking, actually, no, come on, you need to take ownership for this. You need to start making decisions that are healthier for you. There's where freedom comes. Now, people don't like that initially. In therapy, you always get a tug of war at that point.
I can imagine, because I think one mindset is people feel like their cards have been dealt and maybe they're unlucky, or maybe good things will happen to them.
I don't believe that.
Like you're saying, we are in control of it ourselves. I
don't believe that, you know, because if I had have gone with I was quite badly bullied as a kid when I grew up. And, you know, it was, I think it was a combination really. I played piano. I was a bit different. It was very working class Belfast. I didn't quite know where I would fit in. I came from a very ordinary working class family. I didn't have a lot of money, didn't have the best education in my earlier teenage years. And if I had to listen to all of the kind of messages I was given at that period of time, which was like, oh, you don't fit in, you're not good enough, you know, you'll never achieve anything. I remember having a teacher tell me once that I was stupid and that I wasn't very bright, and like said it directly to me. This was in my secondary school. I had a teacher saying, oh, don't worry, you're not very, very bright. So I wouldn't worry too much. Now, it's one example, but if I had to listen to a lot of that stuff and taken it as a fact or as a given, then I wouldn't have moved out of my world really and create. In some ways you have to create new worlds. So we don't have to be. I don't think we have to be victims of our past. I really don't.
It's the past. It's where it should stay.
And you know, that's chapter 1.
Leave it where it is.
Absolutely.
It's done its bit.
Chapter 1 in the book's called "Don't Look Back." You're not going that way.
That's very true. Just got to keep moving forward. And it's almost like this pandemic has taught me, if I make my world very small, it's a lot more manageable.
Yep. Yeah.
So many of us can get so overwhelmed with all the, like you're saying, these outside factors that aren't in our control. And actually, if you do the very small things, right now I'm going to make a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Enjoy that cup of tea. Maybe I'll drink it outside and feel the sun. Then actually it can make everything a bit more manageable.
Oh, what makes you happy, Antonia?
Oh, what makes me happy? I've heard this answer a lot, because I'm going to ask you something very similar. What makes me happy? It would be my family. Yeah. And my family I've chosen. Those are my friends.
Yeah.
People that I feel my most at ease and relaxed. Honestly, just like you described.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah.
And I actually lost my mother at the end of last year.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And it was unexpected, and it was, it's ongoing. Yeah. But it does teach you that you've been very lucky to have that love.
Yeah.
And I'm the youngest of 5, and we speak a lot. And my dad is, now having calls from all of us most days. So it puts life into perspective. And so my happiness is definitely the people I love. I feel very lucky to have, to have those people in my life.
Yeah. It's really tough when you lose a parent, isn't it? I mean, something fundamentally changes in your world that is really, it's hard to put words on, actually.
Oh gosh, I mean, you must, through your therapy, you must speak to people a lot, because it was also very sudden.
Yeah,
So that kind of idea of a goodbye is taken away.
yeah,
Um, but I've done enough therapy, and I know myself well enough to know that just loving her and sitting with it,
mm,
and when that wave comes, and it still comes, and it can completely drench me, and
yeah,
I'm, broken, then that's okay.
yeah,
And I feel very lucky for how long I had with her.
yeah,
So you just I have to count my blessings for everything that I'm very lucky for.
yeah.
But
And there's no
yeah,
formula.
happiness, I mean, it's a big topic, isn't it? And
It's
it's
a massive
something
topic. Yeah,
that's so everyone, it's in everyone's life, but it's also so elusive.
yeah, yeah.
And everyone wants it, and everyone's trying to be it.
Yeah, yeah. Just when you were talking about your mum there, I was reminded, I lost my mum about 14, 15 years ago, and she died quite young. My mum was only 57 when she died,
Too
of,
young.
of breast cancer. But I remember at the time, I had bereavements before, but I'd never really experienced
Mm.
a really close bereavement. And I remember really struggling to put words on what, that these kind of waves that you describe, the ups and downs, and trying to navigate your way through. And I remember a friend of mine said to me one day, he had lost a parent, and he said, you know what it's like? It's like you're in a club or a bar or something, and it's almost like the music stopped, but everybody else has just continued to dance and get on with it, and you just stood there. And I remember it was the most accurate description
That
that
is
I
a
could
great
find.
way to describe it.
It was just like you're there, and everyone around you is getting on with their life, and
Yeah.
you're present and you're functioning and stuff. But it's just like, how can they be celebrating? How can they be feeling
Oh,
joy
totally.
like this? I just couldn't get it. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that's exactly it. I couldn't find the
Mm.
words, but that in that moment, it was like I was stood in a bar and everyone around me was getting on with life, and I couldn't hear the music. Um,
That's really, really
yeah,
um, very accurate
yeah,
on those days where, because you can't really compare where you are or what you've lost. Because what I've
yeah,
learned from other people, it's this, you almost form an immediate connection, like
yeah,
happening now between
yeah,
yourself and I. You immediately have a connection with someone that is deeper and more real, because
yeah,
you've been through something so life changing.
yeah,
And what I've learned about death is, even if someone else has lost their mother, because it's a different mother, it's a different relationship, they're a different person,
yeah.
you can talk and compare, but actually it's so difficult to relate. You feel like everyone's going to go through it at some point, but you're also the most alone, lonely person,
Oh, I know it's.
because you've only had them, and they're your mum, and even your siblings. It's
Yeah, I used to give lectures on bereavement and grief when I worked in palliative care, and it was really interesting because I used to talk through the 6 stages of grief and denial, anger, bargaining. That there's a model Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did this very organized model of grief and stuff, and I used to teach the model and talk about normal grief and all. And then suddenly, when I experienced grief myself, I was thinking, bloody hell, I can go through these 6 stages in an hour, never mind over a period of a year or months. It's just like there was no rhyme or reason to any of it and stuff.
it's not linear.
It isn't at all. But the key thing for me was, and I don't know if this is useful, Antonia, but the key thing for me was that the music does come back
Mm.
almost bit by bit. And I remember thinking about that, and at the time it didn't seem possible. And I suppose if I'm working with a client in any way, shape, or form, even outside of grief, if I'm working with people and they're struggling, it is that kind of knowing that because you're not hearing the music, or if you're not feeling hopeful, it doesn't mean that it
Still
doesn't
there.
exist. It's still there. It's just difficult for
Mm.
you to hear it or for anyone to hear it. And I think that's worth really holding on to. If
Mm.
anyone is feeling a bit hopeless or they're struggling, because we don't feel something doesn't mean that it's not around the corner or it's not coming.
That is a really, yeah, it's a nice way of thinking about it. You've obviously been through it as well. You take it one
Yeah,
day at a time,
that's it. And that's all you can do, one step at a
and you
time.
can't fix it, sadly.
No. And you shouldn't either, because how can you? You should,
No,
you shouldn't fix
but
it.
sitting with it, and Loving hard is really all you can do.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was definitely part of my happy place, that's for sure.
Good.
And then to wrap things up neatly,
Yeah.
as you've just asked me, at the end of every interview with my happy place guests, I ask them, it can be who, where, or what is your happy place?
Do you know, for me, it changes a lot, but I think particularly over the last couple of months. I mean, of course, you know, I've just finished the book, and that's great. And I talk about happiness, and I talk about where we get stuck. But I think what I've realized for me is that when I keep life simple, I'm happier. And I suppose my happy place really more and more is about simplicity and literally living life one step at a time. And I don't mean notionally or intellectually, but I've really learned over the past year or two, particularly, when I keep it simple and I take it one step at a time, regardless of what's going on in my life, I'm a happier human being. And that's my happy place. It's not an external thing. It's not a person. It's not a state.
Philosophy.
It's a way of living. And I think that's what I'm learning. I can be happier when I approach my life in this way. And of course, equally, I struggle when I don't practice that, or I fall off a little bit. I kind of notice then that, you know, old patterns jump back in, or I become bothered by stuff that I shouldn't be bothered by. So yeah, one step at a time in simplicity.
That's really, I mean, that's a great happy place, and it's also very sound advice to me and to our happy place audience.
Yeah.
Owen O'Kane, it's so great to see you again, and so lovely to talk.
It's lovely that we got to talk again, because you introduced me last year. So yeah, it's great that we got to talk again.
I know, and this time we actually properly got to talk.
Proper conversation, yeah. Because I think last time I did a talk, so it's great. I love, to be honest, I love these sort of conversations. I think they're much richer, aren't they? You can just get.
That's lovely. Well, we're just sitting having a cup of tea.
Exactly.
That's great.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you so much for
Thanks so much for having me
this afternoon, and look after yourself. Enjoy the sunshine, and here's to one day at a time.
Exactly. Take good care, yeah?
You too, Owen. Bye.
If you like that video, there are loads more talks, classes and exclusive videos from the Happy Place Virtual Festival. So don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Do follow us on Instagram for constant updates, and enjoy.